Boldwood presents The Runaway Girl, written by Jina Bacarr and read by Laurel Lefko. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Cameron Bally Manor House, Ireland, 9th of April, 1912.
Ava O'Reilly, you're nothing but a common thief who brings shame upon this fine house,
spewed Lord Emsey, wagging his fat finger in her face.
What have you to say for yourself, girl?
A thief, am I, my lord? Ava shot back, refusing to cower before a man so pompous and full of himself, even if he was her employer. With his wingtip collar and fancy silk ascot, he reminded her of a leg of lamb, gussied up for Sunday dinner.
Says who? Your daughter?
She narrowed her eyes, staring her accuser down. Lady Olivia greeted her angry look with a swift turning of the head, her nose in the air, but Ava wasn't finished.
I'd rather dance with the devil than believe her.
His lordship growled.
Then you deny stealing the bracelet?
Aye, that I do. Ava smoothed down her shiny black cotton uniform with her hands, making fists and fighting to keep her composure. Him, with the glow of damnation in his eyes, accusing her like he was the Almighty himself. She refused to back down. With the afternoon sun spilling an arc as bright as a pot of gold at her feet, she wondered how she, the daughter of a fine Irish mum and da, could be so unlucky. But here she was, accused of thievery because she was caught reading a book in a place where a housemaid had no right to be, the library. Now she was paying the price for her thirst for knowledge.
Well, how do you plead?
Asked his lordship. I plead guilty to nothing more than reading your fine books. Ignoring her, Lord Emsey bellowed.
Then how do you explain this?
He dangled a slender rope of sparkling diamonds in front of her nose, taking her breath away. Ava swallowed hard. Each stone was a knot on the noose tightening around her neck. I swear on me sainted mother's grave, I never seen the likes of that till this morning. She's lying, Papa, Lady Olivia decried. She stole it from my jewel case and was trying to hide it when I caught her. Ava gritted her teeth. They both knew it was a lie. Aye, what was a lass to do? His lordship's daughter had hated her since Ava had first crossed paths with her, when she'd used the grand main staircase instead of scuttling down the back stairs. The breach of protocol had not only embarrassed the family, Lady Olivia scolded her, but Ava had attracted the eye of the young gentleman at her side. Lord Home made no secret of his interest in the servant girl, with the glorious red hair spilling down her back. Mary Dolores had warned her about him when Ava joined her sister to work as a housemaid in the Grand Manor. A dandy, she had said, always ready to pat the bum of any servant girl he could get into a dark corner. Did Ava listen to her? No. She was obstinate and bull-headed. A family trait, Mary Dolores admitted, shaking her head. Going through life, casting her spell on every man caught looking at her. Ava paid them no mind, going about her way and insisting she didn't need a man to better herself. Unfortunately, Ava couldn't control the wily fates determined to get in her way. Her relationship with Lady Olivia became even more strained when Lord Home saw her wearing a discarded dress belonging to her ladyship. Silk, with delicate applique around the collar and cap sleeves, the vibrant emerald green set off her red hair. And what was the crime in that? Ava wanted to know, since it was customary for servant girls to lay claim to their mistress's tossed-away garments. Her ears burned when she overheard her ladyship say to Lord Home, You never noticed when I wore that dress? To which he replied, You never looked like that. His comment sealed her fate. Now she'd get sacked for a crime she didn't commit. Ava felt a growing bitterness prickle her skin, making her shiver. She couldn't deny she presented a threat to the daughter of the house, It was no secret her ladyship wasn't popular with the servants with her snotty airs and precise manners, ordering everyone about. More than one prayer was lifted up to heaven in the servants' hall in the hopes her outrageous flirting with the gent from Dublin would have her running off with the handsome man with arched dark brows and a dimple in his chin. Till then, every time the young lord's head turned in Ava's direction, she loomed as a danger to her ladyship's prospects for a secure married life. A danger that must be eliminated. Lady Olivia made it her duty to make Ava's life miserable. She left empty teacups scattered about after Ava tidied a room, complained about her blatant insubordination to Mrs. Briggs, the housekeeper, when Ava failed to make a proper curtsy, then smeared the damp tea leaves Ava set up on the carpets to remove dust under the heel of her pointy boot. Ava spent 2 days digging the crushed leaves out of the rug fibers. By the devil, she'd not be done in by the girl's lies. Hadn't she made every effort to be a good housemaid? Learned to lower her eyes and not stare when the family was about. Cleaned up her ladyship's slops with a wooden clothes peg pinching her nose and set the hot brick at the foot of her bed so the snobby girl would be toasty at night. But she had no intention of getting sacked for nothing more than a man looking at her, even if her mother had warned her. Ava let the moment wash over her, the poignant memory stabbing her in the heart, missing her mum so. A man may be God's creature, Ava, her late mother, Mary Elizabeth Sullivan O'Reilly, had drummed into her head, her pale grey eyes turning a deep slate when she noticed her younger daughter's curves, soft and round. But he's also an instrument of the devil's handiwork. With a face like yours, child, temptation will surely follow. No mind, Ava decided. She'd show them gentlemen she had more to offer. Much more. She would challenge their minds. She set her plan to work, reading and studying from the books in his lordship's library, though borrowing books was forbidden to the servants. Only family members could sign the journal on the desk. A ledger containing the names of the borrowers. Lady Olivia's name rarely appeared. Ava closed her eyes tight, remembering how Mum oft reminded her that her curiosity for knowledge would do her in some day, but she didn't see what was so wrong about trying to rise above her class and gain the freedom that came with it. Plato, Shaw, Shakespeare, and Mark Twain. Stories of grand adventure that thrilled her and made her yearn for a life outside of service. Something her sister didn't understand. What Ava saw as a humiliating job, Mary Dolores embraced as a proper and decent life for the likes of them. 2 orphaned sisters without kin. Ava bit her lip. Her sister was right about one thing. She wouldn't be standing here now, accused of stealing the diamond bracelet if she hadn't lingered in the library after she finished her morning duties. Hidden behind a tall oriental screen, she was reading Romeo and Juliet when Lady Olivia bounded into the room before anyone upstairs was awake, tossing cushions about, mumbling, looking everywhere until she found her bracelet under the blue damask divan. Most likely her ladyship lost it while carousing with the young lord and didn't want her father to find out. Their engagement hadn't been settled, and whispers in the servants' hall confirmed the young gentleman had yet to approach Lord Emsey with a formal request. That didn't stop the loose-tongued cook from gossiping about how her ladyship sweetened the pie by treating him to a taste of her cherry-tipped buds. Ava smirked. Lady Olivia wasn't taking any chances on losing a fine catch like Lord Home. When she caught her hiding behind the screen, she saw the perfect opportunity to accuse her of theft and ruin her.
"I shall ask you for the last time, Ava," Lord Emsey demanded, his double chins wiggling. "Did you steal the bracelet?"
Ava refused to stand down. "No, my lord, I did not steal the bracelet."
"Then you leave me no choice," his lordship said, exhaling loudly, "but to turn you over to the proper authorities at Cork for grand larceny."
"But, my lord," Ava pleaded, fear rising in her so quickly she felt numb.
"Quiet, girl. You're confined to your room until further notice."
"That's not fair. I didn't do anything wrong." Ava flinched when Warner the butler grabbed her. She yanked her arm away, the fiery glint in her eye directed toward Lady Olivia. "You've not seen the end of Ava O'Reilly, your ladyship. Some day I shall be a grand lady." "You, a lady?" Lady Olivia said, disbelieving. "Don't make me laugh. You're not fit to be a scullery maid." Then she turned on her heel and glided upstairs like a pretentious swan, taking her aristocratic airs with her. Ava nearly died with embarrassment, not because she'd called her a scullery maid, but how the guilty could walk away free while the innocent paid the price. Because she was born poor. "No more chatter, girl," said the butler, moving her along. But Ava dragged her heels, her mind spinning. Somehow, some way, she'd get free. Her ladyship felt Ava's gaze upon her and turned around, grinning at her with victory in her eyes. In spite of her determination to fight back, Ava felt the sting of hot tears on her cheeks. The girl's elegant and effortless exit made an impression on her she'd never forget. She swore then she'd never be a victim again. She'd do anything to get above herself and make her place in the world. Anything. And the devil be damned. "Have you taken leave of your senses, Ava Madeline O'Reilly?" Mary Dolores paced up and down the small room they shared in the attic. Dubbed the Virgin's Wing, it wasn't accessible to male servants. "You'll never escape. Warner placed a guard at the back stairs." Ava smiled. "Then I'll sneak down the grand main staircase while the family is still sleeping." "'Tis a fool's plan," Mary Dolores insisted, wringing her hands on her apron and making deep wrinkles in the cloth. Ava grabbed her sister by the shoulders and looked her in the eye. Mary Dolores was a tall, plain girl with faint freckles on her cheeks that begged for sunshine to blossom. They never would, working as she did from dawn till night. She hurt just looking at her sister's long, pale face, worn and tired, the life drained out of her. "It pains me to see you trapped inside this house 14 hours a day," she said, "cleaning and dusting and tiptoeing about all day so as not to disturb a family who barely knows you exist. Why'd you put up with it? Da wanted so much more for you." "But Mum would be so pleased to see both her daughters living in so grand a house." Mary Dolores paused, her heart heavy. "Why did you have to ruin it? Reading books no God-fearing girl would dare look at is one thing, but why did you take the bracelet, Ava? Why?" "I didn't take it." Ava whirled around in a circle, banging her forehead in frustration. "What fairy curse is upon me, that not even my own sister believes me?" "I want to, Ava, but Lady Olivia insisted." "There's your problem. Always believe in your betters over your own flesh and blood." Ava grabbed her sister's hand and bade her to sit down. "Times are changing, Mary Dolores. Faster than a fox with the hounds nipping at its tail. This world of grand manners and extravagant ways won't last." "What fool's talk is this, Ava?" "I know. Every morning before breakfast, I read the newspapers before I place them on the trays. About how electricity and telephones will make communication faster. How a motor car can cover the distance from here to Dublin in a day." Her eyes glowed. "Did you see Lord Holmes' touring car? As big as a ship it is. I'm telling you, Mary Dolores, we're no longer doomed to spend our lives in service. With all them new things making life better for the likes of us, who's to say we can't find jobs and get our own flat?" "But if you can't prove you're innocent, Ava, you'll never have a chance to do anything. You'll be hauled off to prison like a common thief." Ava shook her head. "I've saved all my wages. I'm getting a job in a big factory and going to school." "How can you?" Mary Dolores said, worried. "Even if you escape, they'll track you down wherever you go." Ava set her mouth in a firm line. "Have you no faith in me? There's one place they'll never find me." "I don't believe such a place exists." "Aye, but it does," Ava insisted. "A place where the streets are paved with gold." Hands on her hips, her sister asked, "And where is that?" Ava grinned widely. "America." 10th of April, 1912. 6 a.m. the next morning found Ava with her small cloth traveling bag packed with her few belongings, tiptoeing down the grand main staircase, her head swinging right, then left and back again. She wore her brown tweed suit, which was faded from too many washings, her white blouse, the round collar of which was smudged with dirt, and a worn black hat sitting at a cocky angle on her head. A slender feather curved over her right eye, giving her a provocative look. She reached the landing without incident, exhaled, and counted the remaining steps. 8, 9, 10. She'd avoided running into the staff, and no one in the family was about at the early hour. Only her own quick breathing filled her ears. She'd be on her way before anyone knew she was gone. Then she'd navigate her way through the pine woods surrounding the estate and climb over the hedge of wild fuchsia to the road. There she prayed she'd find a passing vegetable wagon and a friendly farmer to give her a lift to Queenstown, where she could book passage on a ship leaving for America. 11, 12, 13. Nothing could change her mind, not even Mary Dolores crying that she'd never see her again. Ava tried to console her by promising to send for her when she reached America. 14. Going somewhere? A deep male voice startled her. Ava spun around and came face to face with Lord Home. Yes, my lord. No, my lord. Good. I'm in need of female companionship. He leaned closer. She could smell brandy and tobacco on his breath. By his disheveled appearance, she could tell he'd been out all night. Please, my lord, I have an errand to run for Mrs. Briggs. Come, girl. You're running away before the town constable arrives to haul your pretty ass off to prison. Me lord! She stepped back quickly. Be assured I'm not ringing the butler to put you in chains. Everyone knows Olivia concocted that ridiculous story about the bracelet to get you sacked. He turned serious. She never dreamed her father would bring the authorities down on you. Frowning, Ava said, Then why don't she stop him? My dear, you are a provincial. Olivia admits she was wrong, especially when it involves taking a servant girl's word over hers. He shook his head. That would upset the order of things, and that would never do. But it's unfair, Lord Home. Come with me, he grinned. What I have in mind will be far more amusing than sleeping off this hangover. Ava crossed herself. What was he about? Oh, Lord, preserve my beating heart, she whispered when he led her outside, and she saw the French burgundy red town car with big black fenders and white-walled tires parked on the gravel. His lordship gave an order to his chauffeur, who cranked up the car and then opened the passenger door. Smiling, Lord Home said, Get in. Shaking her head, Ava pulled back. I can't, my lord. I'll be in a heap more trouble if I do. I assure you no one will know about our little game. He took her by the elbow and held her tight. Now get into the motor car. But, my lord, don't spoil my fun. I can't wait to see Olivia's face when she discovers you've slipped out of her noose. I'm going to America, Ava said when his lordship asked her about her plans. They'd been driving for a while, with Lord Home trying to entice her to let him drive her to Dublin so she could sup with him at the Royal Hibernian Hotel. She ignored his stabs at flirting, digging her fingers into the toughed velvet interior as soft as goose feathers, and inhaling the smell of swank leather as intoxicating as brandy. She smiled, riding to freedom like a real lady. She stared out the window. She marveled at how the motor cars sped along the road at a good clip, the trees going by so fast they blurred into a swash of green as long as a leprechaun's tailcoat. Which liner have you in mind for your trip across the pond? Lord Home rested his hand upon her knee. She moved away, but his hand remained. I intend to purchase a ticket on the first ship leaving. She lowered her head. If the authorities don't find me first. They won't get a word out of me. He leaned toward her to kiss her, but she backed away. By and by, she had her pride. Come now, not even a kiss for the gentleman who rescued you. You belong to Lady Olivia? Ah, the loyal servant to the end. You're a remarkable girl, Ava O'Reilly. So remarkable, I'm sorry we didn't become better acquainted. He exhaled. Perhaps I can be of service after all. Curious, Ava watched him pull a folded-up note out of his pocket. A wireless message. He skimmed it as he spoke.
There's a fine new ship from the White Star Line stopping at Queenstown tomorrow morning to pick up passengers before heading to New York.
Are you certain, my lord? Ava prayed it was so. She had no choice but to leave Ireland before the authorities caught up to her.
Yes. My dear aunt, Lady Scranton, is aboard. According to her telegram, she boarded the ship at Southampton and will be getting off to join me at Cameron Valley Manor House when Lord Emsey makes the formal announcement.
He leaned closer.
Yes, it's true what they say below stairs. I shall marry dear Olivia and her generous settlement.
Ava let go with a contented sigh. Thank the heavens. May I be the first to congratulate you, my lord?
Thank you, Ava, but I'd rather be aboard ship with you.
She remained silent, not answering him, lest she say something brash, and all her plans were dashed. For once, she kept her mouth shut, though she did give him a disapproving look.
I envy the men aboard the liner they're calling unsinkable with you to make their voyage a pleasant one, he said quietly, resolved to his fate. My aunt insists it's the finest ship to ever sail the seas, with the best service imaginable.
He looked at her as if he were about to tell her a secret. In first class, I hear you have your own bathroom. Ava's mouth dropped open. A bathroom? Aboard ship? To your own sweet self? Is that legal? His lordship laughed. What is this grand ship called, my lord? Ava asked, as the sloping terraces of Queenstown came into view. She couldn't believe she was here, more determined than ever to book passage on this new vessel. If it was fine enough for a titled lady, it was good enough for her. A teasing look came into his lordship's eyes, as if debating whether or not to tell her. Finally he said, The Titanic. Ava squirmed in her seat when Lord Home brushed her cheek with his cold lips, trying to convince her to forget sailing on the Titanic and go with him to Dublin. She was not having it. She stuck her tongue out at him, stomped her foot, and announced in a steady voice if he didn't stop the motor car, I'll scream like a wild banshee. Aye, she was tempting the fates with her threat, but it worked. Pouting like a little boy who'd spilled his pudding, his lordship deposited her in front of the shipping office for the White Star Line. Then with a grunt and a sneer he was off, back to Lady Olivia, as if nothing had happened. But it had, and Ava would never be the same. She was no longer the young girl who held her da's hand tight when she came to Queenstown with its narrow streets winding up steep hills. She relished the memory of those days, seeing him off on his fishing boat, until the day he never returned. The sea claimed him as it had so many others, his body washing up on shore while his soul roamed free. It broke her dear mother's heart. Kind lady she was, her fingers always entwined around the holy black beads her sister in the convent fastened for her. She'd buried 3 sons before they reached the age of 5. Children lost to the ills of being poor, then her husband to the ravages of the sea. 6 months ago her mum had died, but not before she'd made Ava promise to join her sister in service. Now Ava had broken that promise, and she was running off to America, with a price on her head. Leave Ireland? Her home? Was she daft? Her parents were buried here, but she didn't have even a handful of dirt from their final resting place to take with her. Only her mother's black rosary beads. Ava gripped her hands together and beat upon her breast, calling upon the angels to help her. Oh God, please, she prayed, tell my dear Mom I'm sorry, but I have to do this. And please, oh please, make her forgive me. She would, wouldn't she? There was a steep price to pay if she were caught, but the wild intoxication of being free was a heady stimulant that surpassed any grim thoughts she might have. Heart racing madly, she entered the ticket office, her decision made. Less than an hour later, she was the proud owner of a third-class ticket to New York, costing her £7.15 after having looked over the contract and terms of the voyage and marveled at the grandness of it all, including the bill of fare. The menu promised oatmeal, milk, bread, and butter for breakfast. Her stomach growled. Hunger filled her belly as she stood on the pier at the rear of the White Star Line building, her skirts blowing wildly against her legs. Nothing mattered but the ticket she clasped to her chest. She closed her eyes tight, not believing her luck had turned. A sudden chill rattled her bones, and for an instant she feared the north wind would swoop down and take the ticket from her. But she couldn't bear the thought. She held it tighter. Her soul took flight. Her heart clenched. Freedom was hers for the taking. The Titanic set sail tomorrow, and by all the saints who stood watch over the sea, Ava O'Reilly would be on it. Chapter 2. The Titanic. 10th of April, 1912. If there was one thing that made Captain Lord James Buck Blackthorn smile more than holding a pretty woman in his arms, it was a winning hand at cards. To his dismay, at the moment, he had neither. "I'll raise you, gentlemen," Buck said, stretching his long legs under the green-topped playing table. He didn't relish playing against boatmen, professional gamblers who followed the sea, but he was in desperate need of funds thanks to a voluptuous blonde in Mayfair. Smoking a cigarette out of an amber holder, Lady Irene Pennington had sought his protection, appealing to his chivalrous nature, though he had no doubt her plea was an act. Still, the gilded lily with the seductive smile made a man believe he was a king, and not the second son of a duke without home or hearth to offer her. She'd made him feel loved until her husband, a prominent public servant, returned home unexpectedly from a mission abroad and found out about the affair. That set Buck packing his bags and off on another adventure, much to the disappointment of her ladyship. She hated losing him. He made love as fiercely as he led his men into battle. Such vigor was wildly exciting to the aristocratic set, and Lady Pennington was no exception. A generous offer from his old college roommate, Trayton Brady, to join him and his fiancée aboard the Titanic had provided him with the perfect escape. Which was how Buck found himself sitting in the first-class smoking room on the Ship of Dreams, busily engaged in four-handed poker after the ship stopped to pick up passengers and mail in Cherbourg. The liner was headed next to Queenstown in Southern Ireland and was scheduled to arrive tomorrow morning, its final stop before heading out to sea across the North Atlantic. "Too rich for my blood, Buck." Trey threw down his hands, picked up his highball from the cup holder, and with a quick swallow of vodka, he was gone. Buck cocked an eyebrow. Odd. Trey could well afford to stay in the game. That half-smile of his often meant something else was on his mind. Most likely he was off to flirt with the pretty passenger Buck had seen him talking to earlier on the second-class deck. Meanwhile, Trey's fiancée settled into her stateroom. Alone. Not surprising, his friend's romantic exploits with the fair sex were at times indiscreet, though his betrothed had yet to find that out. An American thing, Trey called it. Buck found it difficult to keep his mind on the game. Why the man neglected his lovely fiancée puzzled the Brit. Doe-eyed and chestnut-haired, Fiona Winston Hale, Countess of Marbury, seemingly sailed through life in an effortless fashion and would no doubt choose to ignore Trey's eye for the ladies. In reality, she fretted over every detail lest anyone discover what dire straits she was in. Due to massive debt incurred by her late father, the Countess was in danger of losing Dirksen Castle, her 1,000-year-old family home in Scotland. A fire had destroyed the East Wing, and Fiona had no resources to fund the major repairs. So Buck introduced her to his friend from his days at Cambridge, since Trey was considered quite a catch among the ladies. The American with the pencil-thin mustache and easy smile was not only dapper and handsome, but heir to a vast fortune made in steel by his late father F.G. Brady, a multimillionaire industrialist from New York. While Buck was a member of the British peerage by birth, He was a soldier and high society gambler by choice.
"I'll see you and raise you another 50, said the man seated across from him with a handful of chips in his hand. Mr. Charters was a rich manufacturer from Liverpool with a big belly and an even bigger laugh. "I'll raise you another 100 and call," said the third man, still in the game, a stocky man whose face bore the scars of hard living. He puffed on a big cigar. Buck listened with more than curiosity when the man announced he was Mr. Watts, a cotton exporter from North Carolina. He seemed quite pleased to be aboard the Millionaire's Special, a dubious moniker given to the ship's maiden voyage because of the wealthy men aboard. Notices had been posted in the smoking room warning about games of chance and the likelihood of professional gamblers aboard looking for easy pickings at high-stakes card games. The warning had little effect on the players. Buck shuffled his cards. If memory served him, the man with the cigar wasn't Mr. Watts, but a card sharp traveling under an alias, which made him suspect the man was guilty of daubing, marking the deck in such a way to tell whether a card was a king, a queen, or an ace. His gut told him the man had substituted a marked deck by the worn edges on the green gilt-edged cards inscribed with the white starline burgee in the center. These swindlers played dirty and had the survival instinct of cockroaches. He watched the man carefully, his bulging knuckles, broken numerous times, clear evidence of his dubious background. The gent snorted. "Too much for you Brits, huh?" Mr. Charters wiped his face with his silk handkerchief, then threw down his money. "I'm in." "How about you, Captain Lord Blackthorn?" said Mr. Watts, putting down his cigar. Smoke from the cigar resting on the crystal glass tray drifted toward him. Buck ignored it. "A pair of aces, gentlemen." He laid his cards down on the table. "Three of a kind," said the man from Liverpool with a hearty laugh. "Sorry to disappoint you, gents," said the card sharp, "but a full house takes the pot." The man snickered. He knew Buck was on to him and expected him to act like a proper Englishman and say nothing. Not his style. Watts had another thing coming. "If this were a game at Pratt's or White's in London, sir," Buck said, choosing his words carefully, "I'd call you a swindler. However, since we're at sea, I'll wait until we arrive in New York to settle the score." "I reckon we settle it now." The phony millionaire drew a pistol from his coat and pointed it at Buck. Mr. Charters gasped and then ducked under the table. Buck smiled and didn't move a muscle. Inside he was seething, but cautious. A man with a gun was as deadly as a cobra. You never knew when they'd strike. "Are you suggesting pistols at 20 paces on the boat deck at dawn?" Buck asked, deadly serious, while calculating his next move. He could duke it out with the best of them, whether it was in the ring or playing cards. He had a quick eye and a sure sense of timing. "That will prove interesting shipboard entertainment for early morning strollers. Your lordship ain't going to make no fool out of me." The card sharp cocked the hammer on his pistol. "You're doing a fine job of that yourself," Buck said, brandishing that pistol about like a wild man in a freak show. "I'd keep your opinions to yourself if I was you. Put that gun down before it goes off and you find yourself in a bigger mess than impersonating a certain millionaire from North Carolina." "Are you calling me a liar?" "I am, sir. I played cards with Mr. Watts aboard the Mauretania. I've never found a more honest gentleman." Before the impersonator could fire off a shot, Buck pushed his chair away from the table and knocked the gun out of his hand, then slammed him in the ribs so hard the man staggered backward and fell to the floor. His pistol slid over the dark red and blue linoleum tiles like they were made of ice, his eyes fluttering wildly as he lay on his back, unable to get up. The other gentlemen, engrossed in their card games, barely acknowledged the entire incident. "I suggest you disembark when the ship stops in Queenstown, Mr. Watts," Buck said, shoving the pistol into his jacket pocket. "I shall be on deck to make certain you do." "You British aristocrats think you're so high and mighty," said the man, holding his gut as he pulled himself to his feet. "Unsinkable, like this ship." Buck smiled. "No one is unsinkable, sir. They just think they are." Disgusted, the card sharp stomped off. Buck didn't take his eyes off him until he was through the revolving doors. Then he gathered up the winnings and handed them to the portly man from Liverpool, who'd stuck his head out from under the table in time to see the entire scene unfold. "Good show, your lordship," said Mr. Charters, slapping him on the back. "A story to tell your grandchildren, sir, about your crossing on the Titanic," Buck said, grinning. "Your lordship," Buck turned to see a steward in his white jacket and brass buttons racing toward him. "Yes, man, what is it?" "Come with me quickly, your lordship," he said, out of breath. "It's urgent." "Urgent?" Buck questioned. "Yes, the Countess of Marbury needs your help straight away." "Where's Mr. Brady?" Buck asked, concerned. "I don't know, your lordship. I looked everywhere." The steward paused. "Her ladyship asked me to summon you." Buck remained silent. Tray was no doubt regaling the second-class lady in her cabin with stories of his adventures in the Orient. Indeed, he'd spent most of his time at the bar in the Raffles Hotel in Singapore. Damn him. He'd hoped embarking on married life would settle him down. Obviously not. Buck had no intention of marrying. The former army captain never imagined himself settling down. He didn't believe in love or marriage. He saw what it had done to his mother, a frail but kind woman who had left this earth far too early. In the end, she had suffered more from the pain of loneliness only a woman without a loving companion could understand. Yes, she had her sons, and Buck did what he could for her. But it wasn't enough. He hated his father, the Duke, for how he'd treated her. Women were exquisite creatures to be protected and adored, he believed, not treated as property. Buck had yet to meet a woman who intrigued him enough to give her his heart. He doubted he ever would. He wouldn't stand by and allow his friend to treat the Countess with anything less than respect. Buck admired her subtlety and graciousness, traits he found lacking in most women. She was a true lady in dignity and manner. He often questioned why he hadn't fallen in love with her since they'd known each other for years. But she was bred in another era, when women hid their feelings. He liked a woman with spirit, a woman who challenged him. Fiona was delicate and proper, exactly what Tray needed. "Is the Countess hurt?" Buck wanted to know, hurrying down the 2 sets of stairs to C deck. If he had to, he'd track his old friend down and drag him by the neck back to his duty. The steward tried to keep up with him, suggesting they take the electric lift. "It's not the Countess, your lordship," said the steward, wiping the perspiration from his face, "but her lady's maid. She's taken a terrible tumble, sprained her ankle." "Fetch the ship's surgeon and have him come to her ladyship's stateroom immediately." "Yes, your lordship." The steward dashed off, leaving Buck with a troubled mind. He intended to get Tray alone and set him straight. "I'll skin your hide if you pull this trick again. This isn't Cambridge and a student prank. Grow up." Buck prayed he wasn't wrong in trying to protect Fiona from knowing the truth about Tray. She wanted life to be smooth and orderly and sweet. Tray wasn't suited for that, but her entire future rested upon this marriage. She was running out of time to save her heritage, and Tray provided the perfect solution. Buck would explain to her later, but for now, it was up to him to make the crossing as pleasant as possible. Which was why he went to her stateroom and didn't mention a word about Tray. Chapter 3. Queenstown, Ireland, 10th of April, 1912. "Well, you've been needing a place to stay, lass." Ava turned, surprised. An oddly dressed man stood behind her, grinning. Striped jacket and piped trousers with a small bowler hat plopped upon his head. A peddler. How long had he been watching her? She thought about waiting on the pier till morning, but that was impractical, even for the likes of her. Queenstown wasn't much more than a village with clapboard houses built on steep terraces
with rows of shops along the quays. She had every right to be cautious. She was on the run. She didn't dare set her feet to walking on the streets, lest the local constable spot her. No telling how far Lord Emsey's influence and threats to send her off to prison reached. "I'm leaving in the morning on the Titanic," Ava said slowly, wary his type was oft filled with blarney. "Florrie Sims runs a respectable place next to the bakery and grocery," he said. "If you don't mind beady eyes with long tails staring at you." "Is there no other rooming house?" she asked, curious. "Aye, but you can't beat the tariff at Florrie's. A bed and morning porridge for 3 shillings a night." Ava frowned. After paying for her fare, she had little money left. "Florrie Sims, you say?" "Aye." He tipped his bowler to her. "Be sure to tell her Jeremiah Cobb sent you." He smiled, and she tried not to stare at his broken yellow teeth, long and pointy. "I run a decent house, and I don't take to no spooning with the gents in my place." Florrie Sims made no secret of her disapproval of the whistles Ava elicited from the men on the stairs as the woman showed her to her room on the 2nd floor. With a baby on her hip and another tugging at her skirts, Ava imagined the outspoken landlady couldn't afford to be particular about her boarders. "This is it?" Ava said, not hiding her surprise, when the landlady opened the door. She swore she saw a man jump out the 2nd-story window onto the roof as they came in. She sniffed, and the smell of sweaty bodies filled the air. Seemed the landlady was better at making the rules than enforcing them. That wasn't the worst of it. Tiny cots filled the small room lined up next to each other in 2 rows at least 5 deep. Peeling wallpaper, a cracked, watermarked ceiling, and a large porcelain bowl rimmed with faded rosebuds sat in a corner behind a screen. A young woman lay atop the narrow bed, pretending to be asleep. No doubt she'd found comfort in the man's arms and now dreamed of him. Ava winced as a pang of loneliness hit her. The only time she'd felt a man's arms around her was when the blacksmith's son kissed her in the church cemetery. After confession, one unforgettable Thursday, the priest caught them and boxed the boy's ears and made Ava say penance on her knees for hours. Why is it wrong to want a man's love? To want him to touch her, make her dizzy with desire, to yearn for a man who could raise her spirits as high as the heavens? Such thoughts tormented her, though she prayed hard not to yield to them. "What did you expect, lassie?" Florrie said when she saw Ava's nose wiggle with distaste. "A royal manor house?" She shifted the baby from one hip to the other. "I imagine the likes of you have seen your share of fancy bedrooms." She chuckled. "Take it or leave it. 4 shillings a night with hot porridge in the morn." "Jeremiah Cobb quoted me 3 shillings. Ava folded her arms across her chest. "So you're one of Cobb's girls. I should have known. 3 shillings. She held out her hand. "In advance." Ava turned around and unpinned the handkerchief containing her money from inside her chemise. "A trusting soul, aren't you?" She smirked. "I've had too many of my boarders disappear out the window come the first breath of dawn." It wasn't the fear of mice or loud snoring that kept Ava awake, but the worrisome fear she'd be found out and sent to the local jail. A fine mess she was in, hiding out in a doss house until morning. Curled up on a cot in the corner of the small room, Ava guessed the other female tenant must be asleep, though she couldn't see much through the murky darkness. What kind of devil's underworld went on here when the sun went down, she could only guess. And the smell! Slipping her steamship ticket under the hard pillow, she put her head down. The pungent scent from the bedding made her gag, the fibers still damp with the stain of human desire. Ava had no doubt mice were the least of her worries. She was about to close her eyes when a cold hand slipped up her leg and stroked her bare skin. "You dirty vermin!" Ava cried out, jumping up and kicking him. A loud groan assaulted her ears. "Leave her alone, Ned," she heard a raspy girl's voice say in the darkness. "I got what you're after."
"Why can't I have a turn with her?" asked the man, grumbling close by. Too close. "Because you're my beau," said the young woman, coming into view. Ava could see her face, lit up by the golden glow from the gaslight. And by the unholy, she saw a man grab the girl around the waist and fumble with her petticoat. It must be the same ne'er-do-well who put his hand up her skirt. "Turn away, Ava, my girl," she could hear her mum whispering in her ear, "and protect your innocence." Ava couldn't stop the fervid thoughts clattering about in her brain. She froze when the girl lit a candle and lifted up her skirts so the boy could see her slender thighs. She looked away. With those two spooning nearby, she'd not close her eyes all night. Morning couldn't come quick enough for her. Then she'd be off to America. She couldn't count on anyone but herself to buy her freedom. Anything else was a threat she'd deal with her fists if she had to. She held fast to that gratifying thought, sending up a holy prayer to the angels to keep her safe till she got on board the ship. Only then would she have a chance for a better life. All day and half the night, Ava had kept to the dark corners of the lodging house, munching on the scraps she found in the kitchen. Rinsing her mouth out with well water, the color of last week's washing, looking at her steamship ticket for passage to New York. Over and over again, praying it wouldn't crumble to dust between her fingers. She lay her head down on the cot now and reached under the pillow. "It's gone?" she cried out. How could it disappear? Wait, the girl had boasted about getting what the boy wanted when Ava kicked the sod. It made sense now. She stole her ticket to America. That ticket was all she had to hold on to. No, an intense heat filled her, stripping away any shred of civility she had left, spurring her into action when she heard laughter. "So they think I'm weak? No one's sticking me with a knife to the heart this time. Give me my ticket! Now!" Ava yelled, bolting off the cot and grabbing the lit candle. The arc of light showered the room in an unholy glow as she stood down, facing the girl. "Is this what you're after?" The troublemaker spat on the floor and then threw the white ticket into the air, its fluttery descent to earth caught in the candlelight. Ned snatched it from under Ava's nose. "A steamship ticket, just like the landlady said." He sounded impressed. "I bet McGinnis will give me £2, maybe £3 for it." No, they couldn't take her dream away from her. They couldn't. Nearly every penny she'd saved from her wages had been spent for her passage. "Give it back to me," Ava demanded, setting down the candle and making a grab for the ticket. She missed. Smirking, Ned tripped her and down she went, the breath knocked out of her. The devil he was, but he'd not get the best of her. She'd seen how the world worked and how you had to fight for what you wanted. Aye, fight. And that she'd do. The saints be warned. Ava banged her fist into her hand. "I'll not be done in by the likes of you." Breathing hard, she struggled to get to her feet when, "Open up," yelled a woman's voice outside the door. "I know you've got a man in there." "It's the landlady," whispered the girl, turning down the gaslight. "Go, Ned, now." Ned raced toward the open window leading to the roof, but not before Ava grabbed him by his shirt tail and pulled him backward, making him lose his balance. To her relief, he dropped her steamship ticket before making his escape. She snatched it up and hid it inside her blouse, then let out a deep sigh. Hours yet until the sun came up, but nothing would stop her from having her chance at freedom. She lay down on the hard cot and slept with one eye open the rest of the night. Chapter 4. The Titanic, 10th of April, 1912. "Her ladyship's maid must leave the ship at Queenstown," said the surgeon, a kindly Irishman settled in his years, and in his opinion. "There's no permanent damage, doctor?" Buck asked. "No, my lord. Merely a bad sprain, but she'll not be able to perform her duties aboard ship." Buck nodded, watching the Countess sitting at the girl's bedside,
holding her hand and wiping her brow with a damp cloth. Kind and considerate, Fiona never deemed it beneath her to help the girl, though she barely knew her. She'd foregone having a lady's maid back home in Scotland to cut back expenses, so Buck had secured a replacement from a reputable source in London. Closing up his black bag, the surgeon said, "I'll send a deck steward round in the morning with a wheelchair before we dock." He smiled. "Don't worry, she'll be good as new by the first summer rain." The elderly physician bade the Countess good night. Then he was off to treat numerous bouts of seasickness before turning in for the night. The Countess pulled Buck over to the side, out of the maid's earshot. "Poor girl was standing on a stool trying to put my hat box on top of the wardrobe when she slipped," she said, her voice as soft as a whisper in a dark room. "I shall never forgive myself, Buck." "It wasn't your fault, Fiona." He sat down with her on the velvet settee in the connecting stateroom used as a parlor. He closed the door, giving them privacy. "Be assured, Trey will compensate her for wages lost before she leaves the ship. Yes, Trey has the most charming manner when it comes to women." She said no more, but her silence told him what he wanted to know. She was aware of Trey's indiscretions. Buck studied her pleasant features drawn into a tight smile. In her blissful, sophisticated innocence, she gave the air of a perfect upper-class engagement, whatever the cost to her own happiness. "You can leave the ship at Queenstown, Fiona, if you need more time," Buck said, candidly. "I'll explain the situation to Trey." "No, I need this marriage, Buck, as much as he needs my title. I would have drowned in debt if you hadn't acted as a go-between for me." She looked down, embarrassed. "Things haven't been the same at Dirksen Castle since Papa died. Trey stepped in and spoke to my creditors. Let's say he's been very generous." "I'll pay it all back, Fiona, if you don't want this marriage." "Dear Buck, always looking out for me since we met on that lovely summer day." Buck smiled. How could he forget the first time he had set eyes on her, racing through the thick forest on a black mare, her long chestnut hair flying behind her. She rode side saddle with an elegant grace, as if she were one with the horse. She had such poise then, and she was barely 17. He'd been spending time in Scotland at the Blackthorn family lodge after the nasty business with his father, the Duke. As a young man, fresh from Cambridge, Buck was gazetted to the Coldstream Guards as a second lieutenant and served at the front during the Boer War as an intelligence officer. By the age of 21, he was one of the youngest captains in his regiment and had a promising military career ahead of him until his father insisted he settle down to a desk job and marry an American heiress to enrich the Duke's coffers and settle his younger son's future. His Grace couldn't conceive his son had a mind of his own and wouldn't be dependent on a woman. Any woman. Buck shocked his father by resigning his post, but he retained his honorary title of captain. Then he went into a self-imposed exile in Scotland, riding and hunting, enjoying the solace of the countryside. Fiona was just what he had needed. There he talked over with her the idea of joining the French Foreign Legion, their free and dangerous lives appealing to him. There was something irresistible about soldiers who owed allegiance only to themselves, he had said. The Countess had talked him out of it, as only she could. She made everything seem so easy, this girl who loved to write poetry and knew exactly what to say and how to say it. She kept Buck coming back to Scotland, a place he loved and where he found peace. Although his father reveled in owning a forest filled with deer, the Duke rarely took up residence there, preferring instead to use its existence merely for boasting purposes. It became a refuge for Buck between adventures, amorous and otherwise. It was a quiet time in his life, and his friendship with Fiona grew. By the time the Countess matured into a lovely woman, the two had become good friends. Her father, the Earl, hoped for an alliance between the families when Fiona became of age. He had asked one thing of the young man. Buck wasn't going to let him down now. "I promised your father I'd look out for you." "Is that the only reason?" Her eyes searched his, looking for something he couldn't give her. It would be unfair to let her believe so. "You know what I am, Fiona. A rogue with the scruples of a masked highwayman, intent on giving my protection to lovely ladies but never falling in love." She sighed without embarrassment. "How I do envy Lady Pennington." Buck cleared his throat. "Does Mayfair gossip reach as far as Scotland?" She smiled. "We're not as out of touch as people believe, though in recent years I prefer to avoid the London season." The time of year when society ladies travelled to the city for fancy parties. At 23, Fiona no longer possessed the first bloom of a girl enjoying her debut. With a vast estate and lands to run, it provided the perfect excuse for her to avoid the rush and bother of trying to snag a husband. She was a peeress in her own right, but she'd had few offers until Trey made his move. She was grateful he was willing to take on the enormous task of restoring Dirksen Castle to its former glory. "I shall lose everything if I don't marry Trey. It's not just for me, but the tenants on my lands are simple people, toiling their plots for years and depending on us to supplement them in bad times. I hate to think what would happen to them if the lands were divided up, sold off, and the tenants ousted to pay my debts." Her shoulders slumped, and although she tried to hold back the tears, she couldn't. Buck felt drawn to her, this lonely woman with such a desperate need to help those less fortunate. In a way, they were alike. Since his mother died, he had no family he could call upon. His elder brother, the heir to the title, whiled away his time in France, spending the fortune he didn't have, while his father, the Duke, turned a blind eye. The Countess was also alone, and he was determined to help her. "Dry your tears, Fiona," he said, handing her his handkerchief. "There's a whole new life waiting for you in New York." She wiped her eyes, then laid her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Buck, if only you could stay in New York and be by my side, I wouldn't be so frightened." "I wish I could, Fiona. But there aren't many jobs in New York for impoverished lords," he said, stroking her hair. The cabin parlor felt airless, stuffy, or was it because he found himself in an uncomfortable situation? "After the gossip about my liaison with Lady Pennington quiets down, I must return to London to get my affairs in order." "I shall miss you terribly, Buck," she said, raising her face to his, her lips so close they nearly brushed his mouth. She caught him off guard, making his back stiffen, his urges rising suddenly in spite of the awkwardness of the moment. He would never touch her, never spoil the closeness they had with an impulsive kiss. He resisted her invitation, and she let out a deep sigh, making him feel worse. He didn't feel noble or heroic, but what else could he do? He must face up to the fact it wasn't going to be easy to navigate his friendship with her over the next few days at sea. He was about to break their embrace when, My, isn't this a cozy situation?" Trey said, bursting into the stateroom in a dramatic entrance, his tone angry. He slammed the door and leaned against it, arms folded. "My fiancé and my best friend caught in an amorous embrace." The Countess pulled away, embarrassed. "Please, Trey, you're being silly," she pleaded, smoothing down her dress, her cheeks flushed though she attempted to add a lightness to her tone. "You don't know how difficult it is for a recluse like me to travel these days. I've been all in a tizzy since I came on board, and Buck is such a gentleman, trying to make it easier for me." "Fiona's right, Trey. If a lady can't turn to an old friend, then who can she turn to?" Buck said, standing up and facing his friend. The smell of brandy on the American's breath filled his nostrils, but it was the fierceness in Trey's eyes that made him determined to set this conversation on a calming course.
She's quite upset over the maid's accident, and since you were unavailable, she turned to me for support." Buck made no excuse about his obvious undertone. Trey smirked. "Always in control, aren't you, Buck?" Trey poured himself a glass of scotch from the crystal decanter on the silver tray. His voice wavered, slurring his words. "Then again, you always were. Even when we were cantabs," he said, using the slang word for students at Cambridge. "Whether you were heading up the debating club or rowing against Oxford. I haven't forgotten what good friends we were back then, Buck, though at times you make it difficult." Trey swallowed his drink, then banged the glass down on the small round table, startling the Countess. "Since you've returned to take over your duties, I'll retire to my cabin." Buck turned to the Countess and kissed her hand. She held on to him, not wanting to let go. After assuring her with a smile he wasn't abandoning her, he pulled away. "I'll send a stewardess to assist you, Fiona." "I'll take care of that, Buck," Trey said, the tone of his voice clearly indicating he wasn't amused to find his friend in the company of his fiancée. "In case you've forgotten, the Countess's welfare is my responsibility. My only hope is you. Don't forget it." Then, with a slight bow to the Countess, he left. He'd dispatched many a cad to the mat over their treatment of a woman, but Trey was his friend. In spite of his impoverished state of nobility, the millionaire was jealous of him. Afterward, Buck walked up and down on the boat deck, his collar pulled up against the wind, his thoughts scrambling. The ship moved silently, though he could feel the rhythm of the engines as he strolled the deck. The sea was calm, the cold night warning him the chill he felt wouldn't be short-lived. His thoughts pushed on, wondering what insanity he'd inflicted upon the two people he loved most in the world by coming up with this marriage scheme. His motive was to see them happy, or as happy as two people could be who found themselves in the damnable situation of needing what the other had to offer. Even if it didn't involve the intertwining of the human heart, especially for Fiona. He admired her allegiance to her father and the tenants on her lands. What next? Trey knew Buck had a fondness for his fiancée. No doubt the Americans suspected their relationship went beyond a social friendship, more so on Fiona's side than his. But Trey saw only a man and a woman who shared a personal closeness he didn't understand. God knew Buck talked often about the pretty young girl he rode horses with on his trips to Scotland in glowing terms. He wasn't blind to her affections, though he never gave her cause to believe he could ever care for her in the manner she deserved. She kicked him in the gut with her warmth and generosity, giving more than she received. Yet her goodness also created a tension between them that made him forget he was a rogue. That unnerved him more than anything else. He'd resigned himself to spending his life searching for a companion who burned his soul with a fire he couldn't put out, who made him want to never stop kissing her. Not a dear soul like Fiona, who never ventured from the mores of society. She was in love with him, but she would never say so. But he did remember one night, when the moonlight cast a lovely glow on her skin, and her eyes blazed with such want for him. He wondered if he was wrong about her, that a fire burned within her she'd never shown to him or any man, but wanted to. No, he wouldn't bring that up. Wouldn't embarrass her or himself. Not now, not ever. Chapter 5. Queenstown, Ireland, 11th of April, 1912, 8:30 a.m. The morning sounds hit Ava's ears. Dogs barking, doors and gates slamming, vendors selling fresh prawns, horse-drawn carts rolling up and down the cobbled streets. "Get up, girl. Today's your day to claim your freedom." Ava jumped awake, eager to be on her way to the Titanic. As her heart raced, she heard, "Who is in charge here?" A loud voice bellowed from downstairs,
making the hairs stand up on the back of her neck. A bitter taste sat on her tongue, her mouth dry, no mistaking the blood-curdling brashness of the man. The law. They couldn't know she was here, could they? "Mind your horses, mister," she heard Florrie Sims calling out. "I'm coming!" Ava leaned over the banister and saw two men waiting for the landlady. The one in charge wore dark gray, his hat pulled down to mask not only his face, but what she imagined were his soulless eyes. She'd seen such men in her village, men who proclaimed they were upholding the law.
"I'm looking for Ava O'Reilly,"
the man said, poking around downstairs.
"She rooms here."
Ava gasped. It hadn't taken them long to track her down. Mercy. They'd not put their filthy hands on her. "And who's asking?" Florrie said, indignant.
"Constable Mason Jones. I have orders to bring her in."
"Humph. That don't surprise me none. She's upstairs." Florrie shifted her baby to the other hip. Ava panicked. Oh, dear Jesus, give her the strength to escape this wretched man. She couldn't go back. She couldn't, not when she was so close to boarding the grand ship. Holy Mary, it was a miracle she needed. And it was right under her nose. A breath of warm air, as fragrant as spring, touched her. Ava turned around. The open window. She smiled, hope surging in her heart. As fine an escape as if it were the door to heaven. She had minutes. She grabbed her small bag and plopped her black felt hat upon her head. She was about to pin her ticket for passage aboard the Titanic to her chemise when the wooden floor vibrated under her feet. Dear Lord, they were coming for her, as if the constable threw all caution aside, pounding his boots on the stairs. Ava didn't waste another precious second. Clenching her ticket between her teeth, she tossed her small bag out the window she'd seen the man bolt through yesterday and jumped onto the roof. She shivered and judged the temperature to be about 10 degrees. A brisk wind blew her hat off. The landing stunned her, but she didn't stop. She got to her feet and saw her skirt had caught on a nail. She tugged on it, but it wouldn't budge. She pulled on it, ripping the fabric, and with the wind at her back, sending chills through her, she climbed slowly down the shaky trellis laden with braided ivy so she wouldn't fall. She kept going. What choice did she have? Hanging on for her dear life, promising the Almighty anything if he kept her going, pushing the bothersome ivy out of her face, thankful for the calluses on her hands from scrubbing the carpet, keeping her grip strong until her boots hit the ground. Without taking a breath, she grabbed her bag.
"There she is! Stop in the name of the law, Ava O'Reilly!" she heard the constable yell down from the open second-story window. She looked up at him, disbelieving. Stop? Was the man daft? With her ticket clutched in her fist, Ava took off running, up one winding street and down the next. The smell of cooked onions and cabbages filled her nostrils as she sidestepped piles of horse manure in the middle of the road. She kept going, the morning dew on the air giving way to a fine, salty mist, sweeping away her fear. She wasn't safe. Not yet. If the landlady confirmed to the constable she had a ticket on the Titanic, he and his man would come looking for her and try to stop her from boarding the ship. What to do? She found herself along the Deepwater Quay near the railway station. She looked out into the harbor. The Titanic was too big to dock here. The passengers and mail would have to be ferried out to the liner by tender. Mail. Her eyes grew wide. Bags and bags of mail unloaded from the train and piled up here on the pier, waited to be put on board the tenders going out to meet the great ship. 100, maybe 200 sacks. Ava blessed herself and swept her eyes upward. Sweet Jesus, was there any better place to hide? 2 hours later, emerging cautiously from between two large sacks of mail, Ava popped her head up, looking around in a slow circle for the constable. She saw dock workers carrying sacks of mail loaded on their shoulders and heading for the tender Ireland to set them aboard. Calling out orders, smoking,
The men didn't see her cowering behind the big burlap bags. A few passengers, arriving late on the train, hustled toward the Ireland, while steerage passengers huddled together on the pier, carrying on with endless chatter and a tune or two. No police in sight. Ava exhaled. The coast was clear. A fine nap she'd had, covered by an empty sack, and lulled to sleep by the sounds of the sea, until she heard the blast from the Titanic's funnel announcing she was dropping anchor at Roche's Point 2 miles away. Her heart rang with joy. She found a strange contentment in hearing the ship's whistle, as if the great liner was out there waiting for her, Ava O'Reilly. She had in her mind to get aboard the ship by hiding in an empty mail sack. Then she heard 2 dock workers discussing how they dropped the big sacks into the mail storage compartment through the hatchway.